In this second part of this video series about Forgotten Past, we talk about the painting of the leather and the cloth. In the previous video, we talked about the somewhat complicated assembly process and also painting the non-metallic metal gold effect. So if you missed that video, go check it out. But in this one, we're talking about the red leather pants, the green cloak, and the white cloth on her left arm. Starting with the leather pants, I base coated in Vallejo Air's Armor Brown. I then progressively added more and more P3 menthol white and stippled it into the highlights. Without getting too technique specific, essentially I'm keeping the paint thicker and dotting the areas where I would normally apply highlights with the very end of my brush. I'm still using the side of the bristles, however. I'm not poking the miniature with the brush, but using the last 1% of the bristles on the side of them to build up a dotting effect. My intention here was to make the leather look rough and worn in. For the shadows, I simply added black to the Vallejo Air Armor Brown and glazed the darker tones into the recesses to build up a slow transition. The white cloth on her left arm didn't really take much. I started with an old Citadel paint called Astronomican Gray, and added another older Citadel paint called Shadow Gray to form the base tone. I then progressively added more Astronomican Gray and pure white to get my highlights. The main blending on this part was done with wet blending, so the paint was applied thickly as to slow the drying process, and then blended while it was still wet. It's a smaller piece on the miniature, so it didn't take long to finish. Moving on to the cloak, I remember being somewhat frustrated with how large of a surface this thing was. I couldn't brush stroke across this thing in one solid piece, and I thought to myself that this thing is gonna look like it's patchy because I'm only able to make it through half the cloak. I'll have to stop, readjust my hand, and then continue that line. And I'll never be able to get that continuation perfect, so it's kind of like a bunch of discongruous highlights. So instead of starting to build up my main highlights with a paintbrush, I started with an airbrush. The first green I picked was too close of a true grass looking green. So I restarted with Sybarite green from Citadel, which has a much more evergreen color to it. When you add white to it, it becomes teal, and this was an effect that I liked. For the sake of harmony, instead of using pure Sybarite green for the midtone color, my original base coat, I also added in a little Gauby Brown to desaturate the color, but also make it harmonize better with the armor. Gauby Brown was a major part of the non-metallic metal gold, and I felt like this would draw the two pieces together more. I can't really say if it did so or not. I then built up the shadows and highlights with my airbrush initially, and then using fairly thin paint as to hide my brush strokes, started to intensify the contrast by building up the shadows and my highlights. Once I got my contrast to a place that I liked, I started to add little lines to the brightest parts of my highlights. This gave the illusion that my cloak was made of a rougher material where the light would catch on the fabric of the material where the brightest spots are. I feel like I could have gone farther with this, making the cloak look almost like it was made out of a thicker wool material. Finally, moving on to the head, I was excited to flex my new Scale 75 flesh set. I started with a base coat of a 50-50 mixture of pink flesh and light skin. I wanted the skin to look rosier but still be pale. I then added progressively more pale skin to develop a highlight. I then glazed some African shadow into the cheeks to contour them more, but also to develop that characteristically rosier cheek area. I'm dealing with a feminine subject, so I wanted it to look more like blush and less like rosy cheeks, so I used African shadow, which is kind of more of a purple and less of a true red. The face at this point looked awful to me. A friend of mine described it best when he said she looked like she got splashed with cold water right after waking up. Her eyes were too wide, so I decided to make her look more elven, more wizened, and almost untrustworthy. I narrowed the eyes and bumped the highlights, made the pupils blue, and added some defining lines around the nose and the eye socket to make the details pop out more. I then painted the black hair and the gold circlet around the face to see what more I could do with it. When you add in the hairline and other details around the face, it kind of blocks in the face and allows you to see what it really looks like. And I wanted to do that so that I could see what else I could do to the face to make it look better in the confines of what actually was the face. The black hair was done with a series of grays, blacks, and whites. Any brand will work in this case. I wanted to place the highlights right at the forehead, and the reason that I wanted to do this was because when something is shiny, The highlight forms at a point where it would create a 45-degree angle with the viewer, the light source, and the shiny object. As you move around the shiny object, the highlight would shift. In the case of this miniature, it doesn't, but you can force a viewer's perspective by painting it in such a way. It's a very similar technique to non-metallic metal, and we'll discuss it more in the future. Once I had these details blocked in, I decided to paint the lips a purple color, more African shadow. After placing the head on the miniature, I also cleaned up the cheeks some more with some more African shadow glazes. I defined the hair better, and I also added some teeth, which I forgot to paint, with a little off-white. That's it for this video. In the third and final part of this series, we'll talk about scratch building the scenic base again, scratch building the quiver and also the bow, and also painting all those elements and pouring a resin river. So stay tuned for that. But for now, let's check out a mini person's model. We're doing it live. Oh, let's do the Collective SG. Oh, Dark Imperium minis. What up? Looks like the Collective SG is a painting commission studio, and you can check out some of their stuff on Instagram and Facebook. These are like perfect tabletop minis. Like you couldn't want more out of your gaming miniatures. Good use of the airbrush, nice reflective sword on the captain. That floating gunship thing looks pretty cool. I like the gem effect of the eye in the middle. I like the caution striping on the flying Primaris dudes with gigantic boots. Thanks for the submission, Collective SG. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a thumbs up on it. If you like the channel and want to support it, I have stickers and t-shirts available on my Redbubble account. Subscribe or die, but most importantly, don't forget to paint more metal!